This video is a very brief introduction to jar files or Java archive files. Now, much like the other videos in this collection, this little series, there's a lot more you can go into and learn than what I'm going to cover here, but this is just meant to be an introduction to the idea of archiving your files together. There are lots more options you can explore, but I'm just going to give you kind of an introduction and an overview of some of the basic functionality of creating and using jar files. So a jar file, again, a Java archive file, it allows you to bundle files together. You typically bundle the class file, so that's your actual bytecode. A lot of times when you're sharing jar files, you want someone to be able to run your code, but you don't want them run your program rather, but you don't want them to see your source code. So if you bundle together the class files and make it executable, they can then run your program, but they don't have access to the actual .java files, so they can't actually see the source code. So this is kind of a way to provide people with access to your program without providing them access to your code. It uses a zipped file format to bundle things together, so it is a compression. It has ability to compress. It provides both security and compression. Jar files does provide support for versioning. Again, we're not going to look at that, but that's something you can kind of explore a little bit more in depth on your own if you're interested. And jar files are meant to be portable. So anywhere that you have a Java virtual machine, you can extract and look at the contents of a jar file, or you can run an executable jar file. So it is meant to leverage the portability nature of Java itself into the archive. Java jar files contain what's called a manifest file. This provides meta information about the jar file. You can also modify this file to specify certain characteristics, so dependencies on other jars, or version information, or information about security. The manifest file contains name value pairs. Okay, so if you want to create a jar file, you can go ahead and look at the manifest, and you can play around a little bit with modifying those the information that's contained in that manifest file. To create a jar file, so the Java archive tool is part of the JDK, so you don't need to install anything extra. It comes built in with your JDK. And you can do it through command line. You can also do it through your IDE. So IDEs provide the ability to create jars, including executable jars. In Eclipse, you can just right-click the name of the class and select export, and then follow the menu through there. The other IDEs will have a similar way of doing so, of creating your jar files. I'm going to actually show you the command line version because we'll just kind of explore that a little bit, and then I leave it up to you to kind of practice with the IDE version. But I want to actually just show you what the sort of different flags you can set from the command line, and then again you can kind of play with how to do it on your IDE. So to create a jar file, the command is jar, and then you can put some flags after the jar command. C is for create and F is for file. So if I say jar CF, that means create a file. After that, I put the name of the jar file, and then I list all my infant files. I can space them out by a space, or I can also use star to specify all the files of one type. So for example, I could say jar CF, that's the name of my jar, and then I want all the class files and all the image files in the current directory. Okay. There are other options. There are options you can specify if you don't want it to be compressed. Compressed is the default. You can include V if you want verbose, if you want to see what's happening as a jar is being created. So this will create just a compression, just an archive of your files. But oftentimes what we want is we want an executable jar. So a jar itself isn't necessarily able to be executed. It's just a collection, right? It's just a way of compressing and grouping together your files. Kind of think about that as just like a zip, right? Zips aren't executable. You can't click on them to make them run. It's just a collection. And that's what just a default jar is. But you can also have an executable jar. And to do this, you use the command CFE. E stands for entry point. You can also think about it like executable. And what you do now is you say jar and then CFE, then again the name of your jar file. Then you put your driver program. So this is going to be whatever the class is that you want to run. So whatever code you want executed, basically the class with the main method, you put the name there. And then again you list all your input files. Okay. Now, to extract a jar file, the command is T followed by F. T stands for, to view a jar file, rather. The command is TF. T stands for table of contents. To extract a jar file, you use XF. X stands for extract, and then the jar file. Okay. Now, do note that your jar extraction will overwrite any files that exist with the same name. So if you have files, you put them into a jar, you extract the jar, or sorry, use have some files, put them into a jar, then you make changes to those files, then you extract a jar, you're going to lose your changes, right? The jar is going to, extracted files are going to overwrite. So just be aware of that. And to just run a jar file, the command is Java, but then you put the -jar and then the name of the jar file. So let's just take a look at extracting both a text-based and a graphical program. So I just took some files from that we've used before. So let's start with this is just our eviction class and our eviction stream practice from back when we used streams. And then there's our evictions data file. So I'm just going to use command line here, and I can't adjust the font size, so hopefully you can see that okay. But I am here in my folder. Okay, so there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to first create a jar file. So I'm just going to create, well, I'll go ahead and I'll create the executable version. So I'm going to say jar CFE. So that's create the file and make it executable, or give it an entry point. The name of my jar is going to be eviction practice.jar. And then the name of my entry point is eviction stream practice. And then what files do I want to put in my executable? Well, I can decide whether I want the source code or not, right? I can either include the .java files or not. If I didn't, I would just put all of the .class, and I think, let's see, is this a CSV, and all of the CSV files. So there we go. Okay. And there it is right there. There's my jar. Now this says executable. Note that I can't click and run it because it's not a graphical program. So that's sometimes a confusion that people have with runnable executable jars, that they want to click on them. And if it's a GUI program, you certainly can click on it. But if it's not a GUI program, you can't run it that way. You have to run it through either command line or some other way. So let's actually run this now. So now we can run java-jar eviction practice.jar, and that's going to let me run it. And let's see what happened there. Hang on one moment. The problem was we had all the code that actually displayed things commented out in that in that eviction stream practice class. So let's rejar it and rerun it. And there we go. That was the printout of the neighborhoods, and then we also had where I tried to reuse a stream that had already been used to show that it throws an exception. So there we go. There's the running of our text-based executable. Okay. So now let's take a look at one last thing. Let's look at the table of contents. So we can say jar tf eviction practice.jar, and that will show us all the files in there. So there we go. There's the meta, the manifest, and then there is the class files and our CSV file. If I want to look at the manifest file, I could extract it. Jar xf eviction practice.jar, and you can see now that there I get to see all of my files would have been replaced, and there's my meta inf, and there is that. I can open that. I should be able to open that with Notepad. And you can see that this is kind of the default. It gives you the version, what it created by, and the main class. But you can add, again, more name value pairs to specify different characteristics that you want about your jar. So it's actually a simple little utility, but very powerful. Let's take a look at a GUI example. Okay, so here is just that one of the JavaFX programs that we wrote to display an image. So let's go into that one. Okay, and I'm going to now say again, jar, create a file that's executable. The name of my jar is going to be GUI.jar. The name of my entry point is the GUI image display, and then I want to put in there all my .class files and all my, I think that's a JPEG files. Okay, so there we go. There's my GUI, and here let me actually just create a new folder for the jar so I can put that in there, and then when we extract it, we can see it again. So if I go in here, in this way I am allowed to run it again from the command line. So I could say java-jar GUI.jar, and there you go. You'll see my pups there. Or because it's a graphic program, I can double click it, and that will let me run it as well. Okay. So there you go. There is a very simple introduction to creating, extracting, and running jars and executable jars.